October is a significant month, marking Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, a time when we come together to remember, honor, and support the brave women who have experienced these profound losses. At Hey Hannah, we believe that sharing their stories is a powerful way to connect, heal, and make a difference. Before we dive into these incredible stories, let's take a moment to recognize the strength and vulnerability of the women who have joined us. We extend our heartfelt gratitude to them for their courage and their willingness to be open and honest about their experiences. But why is it so crucial to bring awareness to pregnancy and infant loss? Well, here's a staggering statistic that might give you a sense of its significance. According to the World Health Organization, approximately 2.6 million babies are stillborn each year, and an estimated 2.8 million newborns pass away within their first month of life. These are not just numbers, they represent the countless lives affected by this heartbreaking reality. Now let me tell you why Hey Hannah is dedicated to this cause. Hey Hannah is an ongoing platform that's deeply personal to me. It's a place where I remember my own infant loss, my precious Hannah. Through Hey Hannah, we strive to bring awareness, offer support, and create a community where people who are suffering can find comfort, connection, and belonging within Hannah's hive. Throughout this episode and the others to follow, you will hear remarkable stories from strong, resilient women who found hope and healing through their experiences. These stories will touch your heart, inspire you, and remind you that you're not alone. Together we can shine a light on a subject that's often kept in the shadows and provide solace to those who need it most. So grab a tissue, get ready for some inspiration, and let's dive into the stories of Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month right here on Hey Hannah. Stay tuned because you don't want to miss a moment of these incredible narratives. Thank you for joining us today, and remember, together we can make a difference. Hey everyone, welcome to the Hey Hannah podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Maya Fields, but to my friends and those who know me well, I'm just Maya. I'm a higher education administrator, a mother, and a wife of 14 amazing years. But above all, I'm a Christ follower. This podcast is a special platform created to honor the memory of my beloved daughter, Hannah. It's here that I have the chance to have the conversations that I never got to have with her, to share the wisdom and love I wish I could have passed on. It's a reminder to cherish the precious moments we're given and a testament to the power of healing, hope, and personal growth. If you're someone who's seeking personal growth, inspiration, and practical advice to build a solid foundation for a successful and fulfilling life, this is a place for you. Join me as we honor Hannah's memory together. Laugh, cry, and learn. Get ready for a podcast that is so much more than you could ever imagine. The Hey Hannah podcast, healing hearts, one conversation at a time. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hey Hannah podcast, and thank you for tuning in for another episode. For October, we are doing a special series. October is Pregnancy, Infant, and Child Loss Awareness Month, and so we want to make sure that we dedicate some time this month to bring awareness to this very special and unique community. The thing about bringing awareness to issues is when you do bring awareness, it brings about more understanding, which obviously lends more support to the individuals who are in the community. Statistics also show that when you are more aware of particular outcomes that can happen in pregnancy, you tend to have a better outcome. So that's one of the things we hope to gain by bringing more awareness this month. Another thing that's very important is when we talk about pregnancy, infant, and child loss awareness, there is a financial aspect to loss that a lot of people just don't understand. And the more that we tell our stories and get our stories out there, it creates more social pressure for insurance companies, because ideally, there's several changes that need to be made when we look at coverage and different overall offerings that are available to families who are in such a tough position. And obviously, their top priority is grieving such a huge loss. So, one of the things that we can do, and one of the things that I'm happy that our podcast is able to offer, is a platform for individuals to share their stories. And that's the way that we are spreading awareness. Just a small fact: about 1 in 175 pregnancies result in a stillbirth. And tonight we have Amber Trammell here, and she's the one. And her story still deserves to be told. So I am so thankful that she is being brave enough to come here and share her story with us. So, Amber, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your openness and willingness to share. So I appreciate you coming on, and please share as much with us as you are comfortable with sharing.
I appreciate you having me on. I always like talking about him. My name is Amber Trammell, and my firstborn was stillborn on November 28th of this past year. It's been a tough almost 10 months now, to almost to today. But it was a tough journey just to conceive him.
Yeah.
I have PCOS, and so it's difficult, and it can be difficult for people with PCOS to get pregnant. So we had been going through fertility treatment, fortunately pretty minor, but he was actually our second baby. We had one baby, but that baby did not make it. We miscarried at 6 weeks. And then it took us another 8 months before we were able to get pregnant with Caspian. Caspian's my son's name. But I remember it very well. He was actually, we were told by our doctor, if this next cycle didn't work, then we would move on to more invasive options. And we got pregnant with him. And 3 days before I was scheduled to have my period is when I got a very, very positive test. So we were feeling pretty good. We were moving out of the house. We went to a new house. So this was all happening at once. It was June. It was the end of June when we found out. It was a couple weeks before my birthday. And unfortunately, things were pretty rocky, I would say, from the beginning with my pregnancy with him, because the day before my birthday, which was July 10th, so within a couple of weeks, I had started to bleed, which is more common than what is typically known, but it freaked me out. I thought I was miscarrying again. So I was just a total mess. I don't even know how to express that day. It was just not a good day. So they brought me in for an emergency ultrasound the next day, and we found out that he was actually okay. And I just had a subchorionic hemorrhage, which is basically when your uterus is expanding, it gets these little micro tears in it, and it can cause bleeding. And they can vary in size. Some of them do end in a miscarriage if it's a bigger one, but ours was a bit smaller, so it just kind of passed on its own. So that was July, and then everything was good up until his 20-week ultrasound. So that was October, I want to say it was October 20th.
Mm-hmm.
And we went in and they weren't really telling us much. The lady was just going through the motions, but I could tell that there was something off. And she finally spoke up after I was pestering her a bit.
Yeah.
And she said, well, his head looks a little small and his body looks a little small, but his feet are big. So that was like the one positive that we got, was that his feet were big. So I say that he gets that from his dad. But then the doctor came in and confirmed that he had growth restriction. He was measuring at 18 weeks instead of 20 weeks. And that's when I found out that babies up until 20 weeks should all be growing at almost exactly the same rate. They should be roughly the same size.
Oh, wow.
It's only after 20 weeks that they start to vary in size.
Huh.
So they said it may not be something to worry about, but so he could have just been a small baby, but it was not common for babies to vary that much. So they sent us to a specialist who confirmed the same thing. So what she told us at the specialist, first she gave us the option to terminate if we wanted to. And I said, nope, that's not something that we want to do. And then she gave us a couple of other options. She said we could test him in more detail and see if there's something going on, or we could wait to see if he grows more. And if he keeps growing and only is this 2 weeks behind, then he'll probably be okay.
Yeah.
So per her advice, we waited a month and we came back in and he was growing further. But instead of being at 22 weeks, measuring 22 weeks, even though I was 24 weeks, he was now measuring at 20 weeks. So in the 4-week time frame, he had only grown 2 weeks. So they had concerns from that. They started testing me and more in depth, more detail, and they found that my cervix was thinning. So they told me, and this was a couple of weeks before Thanksgiving at this point. So they told me that I could give birth at any time and that he was a little too small. And if he came out, we would be limited in our options of what we could do, whether the prenatal center, the NICU, would even take him because he was so small. But she said that it was promising because he had grown a couple of weeks worth. So if he could just hang on for another couple of weeks, then we would probably be okay. And they would have us talk to the NICU and be prepared for me to deliver him quite early.
Yeah.
So then, of course, Thanksgiving comes. We're feeling a bit more positive, but I guess cautiously optimistic because we knew I could deliver at any point. Well, the 27th came around, so that was a Saturday. No, that was Sunday night. And I started cramping. And I thought, oh no, I don't know what this is. I was hoping it was just the normal cramps you get at that point, but I called the on-call OB and she said, given my history, I needed to go to the hospital. So went to the hospital and they had a hard time finding his heartbeat. They were using a Doppler for a really long time. And I was starting to freak out. And the nurse was trying to calm me down, but finally they had a doctor come in and they brought in, it's one of those rolling ultrasound machines, so you can actually see it. And it was really, really old, so I couldn't really tell what could be seen, but the doctor said she could see his heartbeat, but it was beating very slowly. It was beating at like 50. And with babies, they should really be above like the 120 range. And so that was the second big concern that we had that night. Big red flag. So what they did is they called the ultrasound tech, the on-call tech. And so we ended up, I remember being really frustrated about this. we had to wait for her to get in so that she could do the ultrasound.
Yeah.
And I remember saying to the doctor, can you just take him out? Just take him out, see if we can do something.
Yeah.
And the doctor said, well, no, it's a really invasive surgery and there's no guarantee we'd be able to help him anyway. Of course, I didn't care. I just wanted him to have the best chance possible.
Yeah.
So I remember being very frustrated about that. So finally, the tech got in and we walked across the hall to the room, and they very briefly found something, but we ended up watching his heart stop. And so it was at that point, it was probably midnight. So about midnight, the morning, 28th. At that point, they gave us two options. I could either go home and sleep on it and then come back in, or we could be induced and deliver him. And I did not want to go home knowing that my son was no longer alive. So we went ahead and we were induced. So this again was about midnight, and said it could take a couple of hours for anything to get moving. So a couple of hours goes by and my water broke at that point. I felt it pop. I remember thinking how weird of a sensation that was.
Yeah.
But then the nurse came in right after and she confirmed that my water had broken, and they offered to give me pain medication. And initially I said I did want it because I was terrified of how bad the contractions would be, because I have a history of strong cramps, so I know how bad they can get. And so she said, we're absolutely fine to do that. You may consider holding off, just because when you're induced like that, it can take labor longer to progress. And they can only give me that medication for so long. Okay. So I decided to wait a little bit, but so this was about 2 a.m. at this point. Well, he ended up being born at 3:25. So within an hour and a half, I was able to deliver him. So the doctor explained it to me that sometimes for some women, labor can go from 0 to 100 very fast. And that's what happened to me. I was able to get the medication about 15 minutes before he was born, before I had to push him out. And I had him very fast. And I just remember it was really hard because I hadn't progressed in my pregnancy long enough to have gotten into the training on how to go through labor. And I don't know that I ever thought that that's something I would necessarily need to do, because I mean, obviously you just breathe through it. But then I realized when I was delivering him and going through all of that pain, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, how do I breathe?
Yeah.
And so I had to be coached through it, because the pain was so hard that it was causing my hands to like seize up. I couldn't move them. And I remember my husband tried to grab my hand and I slapped it away, because my hand was like, it was just flat. I couldn't move it from that position. And I look back and that was probably the only humor I found during that time. But he was born, and I don't know if we had him in the bereavement suite or not. I just remember it was a large room. They allowed my family in there with me.
Yeah.
Thankfully, because they were all able to coach me through the situation. But once he was born, they weighed him. He was 12.7 ounces, so he was still really little. And I remember the doctor came in and told me that this was going to be hard, but I would make it through it. And she asked if I wanted to have him tested to see if there was something that caused his growth restriction. So we allowed them to test. I think they just tested his placenta.
Yeah.
They may have tested the umbilical cord. It was one of the two, or maybe even both. But they sent that off for testing. But she said ultimately he looked really good from what she could see, and he was just really small. So the next, so that puts us at around 3:25 in the morning. We were able to, the hospital offered to take pictures for us, and they weren't professional pictures. They just brought in a nice camera and took some pictures for us so that we would have that to remember.
Yeah.
And we were able to give him a bath. And then we were fortunate that this hospital had the type of, I don't even know what kind of bed it's called, but they put a bed on top of this cooling system to keep him cool so that he doesn't deteriorate very fast. So we spent that whole time with him. I got in just a little bit of sleep because the whole process is exhausting. You don't have to have a full-term baby for labor to be intense.
Yeah.
But we got a little bit of time with him, and so that was one of the pictures that we got of that day. He was itty bitty, but he was very cute.
Yeah.
We ended up, I think it was called Angel Pics. We ended up having one of his pictures sent off because you wouldn't know it unless, this happened to you, but there are companies that are willing to do special things for you to help you through your grieving process. And one of those is when babies are born prematurely, a lot of times they don't look very good, depending on how long ago they had passed. And so they'll touch up the first picture for free, just so you can have that memory without all of the financial burden on it, because that can cost hundreds of dollars to get done.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure I put one of those pictures in here. I have a whole booklet. I just ordered it off of Shutterfly and kept all of our pictures just in case, instead of printing all of them out. Actually, I may not have put that in here, but that's okay. The picture that we ended up using was this one.
Adorable.
So he looks a lot like me. He's got his dad's hands and feet. But it was interesting because I had dreams of him. One dream he had bright red hair, but the other dream he had very blonde hair, almost white, and he was born with almost white hair. His eyelashes were white. And I've never seen that before. So it was a tough time. It's still tough.
Yeah.
But I miss him every day. His full name is Caspian Isaac. Isaac is Jake, really, my husband. He really liked that name, and it was also my great grandfather's name.
It's a beautiful name. It's so unique. I love it.
Yep. Yeah. It took a little bit of work on the first name, but I think it fit him very well. So that was kind of his birth story. That put me through a lot, and I'm still healing from just the trauma of it all.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely understand where you're coming from. And thank you so much for sharing with us. I know it's hard to do, but it can be helpful. It can be a part of your healing, and it's another way to still be able to talk and share about your child, because it's still something that every parent desires to do, whether your child is on earth or no longer living. So thank you so much for sharing with us. Um, is there anything that you can say, just like one thing that's been very helpful, or probably the most significant thing that's helped you move forward in your grief journey?
Um, I would say the biggest thing is not bottling it up. Um,
Yeah.
I think in the past few weeks, I've had probably most of my healing, and I have been the most honest about what I'm feeling in the past several weeks. And I've joined groups online, and I've actually hit the point with the ones online, I've had to stop following them because it's just a constant reminder, and it makes you think that every single baby is going to be born stillborn, or is going to be miscarried, or is going to pass from SIDS. And while I was the one that it happened to, I mean, statistically, it's not as common, but
Yeah,
it can be really easy to drop into a sense of hopelessness,
for sure.
seeing that constantly. It's great in the beginning to be able to know that you're not alone. It almost feels awful because you so badly don't want to be the only one that has
Yeah,
gone through it, but at the same time, you wouldn't wish that on somebody else either. And those
absolutely.
are two very conflicting emotions.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so that's really hard. So, like, part of you thinks, am I a bad person? And then part of you just feels so relieved that, oh, well, God's not just picking on me. So
I'm
I
so glad
remember,
that about the groups though, because I
yeah,
felt that, like, I wanna get out of the group because I can't see this all like, it can be overwhelming, and again, it can
mhm,
start to shape the way that you think, and this is not supposed to happen, so when you're seeing it constantly, I do feel like it can kind of, like, start to taint you a bit. And then you feel bad. It's like, well, I don't want to leave the group, but I kind of feel like I need to. So I'm glad you said that. And maybe it's just not my own thinking that it can be overwhelming sometimes for sure.
mhm,
I get that.
yeah. Well, I didn't leave the group, but I
I
did
did.
unfollow it. So if I want to join in with other people that are in that group and
Yeah.
connect with them, I can, but I just can't take all of the most of my feed was just filled with that. And then the other side is trying to conceive again. It's its own thing in and of itself. And so I was part of some of those groups as well, and I had to stop
Yeah.
following those because each time that you see a no, it's hard, and it's even harder when you see other people get that yes
Yeah.
because you just so badly want it for yourself. So I would say the most helpful things for me, other than allowing myself time to connect with others that have experienced this and then setting boundaries of when it's just too much, is I went to a physical, like, in person support group with
Hmm.
people in my area, and not very many of us, but I got pretty close to them, and I've now got contacts because what I would like to do, one of the things I remember that was really hard on me leaving the hospital was obviously leaving without my baby. And so I think what I'm going to do, and I've created one already, but I just got a baby crochet template
Hmm.
from Etsy, and then looked up angel wings. And so I'm going to start making those, and I'd like to be able to donate them to hospitals
Absolutely.
because while it's not, obviously, it's not near as close to holding your baby, just a
Yeah.
placeholder while you're in that frame of mind
Yeah.
can offer healing.
Absolutely. And I think it's helpful, like another form of connection. I know for me, especially in the early stages of my grief, it's like I so badly wanted to see someone who was further down the road than me so I can see, like, okay, it's possible to have some form of a life again. So I feel like by you doing that, it offers, an immediate form of support from someone else, even though like every day is not good. Like some days are bad. Some days you can talk about it and you're okay. And sometimes it's an ugly mess when you say something, and that's all fine. But it's good to see like someone who's a little bit further down the line, and then you're like, you know what? They look okay. They look like,
Mhm.
they're doing okay. So I commend you for doing that. I know that's extremely hard to do, to get back that close um, to a place that can kind of have some shaky memories for you. But what a blessing you'll be to those individuals for being that open and willing to do that for them. That's really beautiful. Do you feel like you've had a lot of support from like family and friends? And do you feel like there's anything you can say for anyone who has a family member or close friend who's dealing with something like this? Like, how can they be of support? What's the best way that they can support someone that they love who is grieving in this way?
So I do have a lot of support, but it is hard for my family to be able to support me because they've never gone through this and
Yeah.
they don't know of anybody who's gone through this. And so it can be tough for family to know exactly what to do. I mean, we've had some rocky times just trying to figure out how to live through something such as
Yeah.
this. But I do have a good support system. I'm able to talk to them about how I feel. And I would say for anybody that's looking for advice on how to be that support system for somebody that's gone through this, probably my number one thing is validating that their baby was here, even for a short time. They are the mother of that child or the father of that child, and they're grieving, and that grief is okay. It's going to happen. The second thing is it's going to take time. It may not happen right away, and they may be uncomfortable with how long it's taking. But from the research that I've done is it can take on average, and this is just on average. So there's a spectrum
Hmm.
on the scale for how long it takes grieving people to get to a point where they can be okay. It takes on
Yeah.
average 2 years for mothers who have lost their children. And I mean, I'm still within that year, and I can
Yeah.
totally understand why it would take so long. So I would say give grace. Give grace to the time that they're going through. And while they may be grieving longer than what you would think, it may just take time.
Yeah.
And that's not to say to allow unhealthy behaviors happen that would just put
Yeah.
you into deeper depression or anything, but it simply takes time. This is a hard thing. It's not this. I've lost other family members. It's not the same.
Yeah.
It's it's a little more personal, I would say, because this is literally part of you
Yeah.
that has gone. I tell people all the time, part of me died the day that my son died. So that's hard.
Absolutely. Well, Amber, thank you so much for sharing with us. Is there anything else that you'd want to say, or anything else you want to share about your story?
I think that if anybody hasn't, they should listen to your podcast about feelings not matching your faith, because that is something I have struggled with immensely. And everything you had to say, I it completely resonated with me. And that's another just really hard thing because I mean, if you say you're a Christian or if you're a believer in some God, I mean, how can you not believe during a hard time? But at the same time, I remember feeling betrayed by God. Like there's still days that I'm angry about it. And while me personally, I'm a Christian, I believe in God, and I believe that he doesn't change and he's good. what happened with my son wasn't good. And so those questions are really hard. And I went to my church and I asked those questions, and they didn't really have anything that they could tell me, because unfortunately, sometimes bad things just happen. So I highly recommend, if anybody is feeling that particular way, to listen to your podcast on that, because I remember that was another huge problem that I'm still working through today.
Yeah, completely understandable. I told my therapist, like, when I was first kind of really, really early on in my grief, I was like, I feel like I'm having a faith crisis because and I'm laughing, but it's like everything I felt like I knew about my faith is not supporting what's going on in my life. And so it was just really conflicting. And I'm glad to hear that that episode was helpful for you. That means a lot to me. And there's a lot more I have to say about that. I'm not ready to. It's kind of hard to talk through it, but I feel like I've grown a lot from where I first was in my grief journey, especially with dealing with that faith crisis, because it was literally a crisis. Um, it
Yep.
was like help. My whole life has been in the church, and in Bible study, and that strong connection to my faith, and just to feel like, what is going on here? So it's definitely like a faith crisis, is exactly what it was. And I feel like I've grown a lot since then. I feel a lot more comfortable and a lot more secure. Um, and a bit more clear about things with my faith. And I do want to share more about that because I feel like I see a lot of individuals, especially mothers, just because the groups that I'm in are primarily with mothers, who struggle in that area where they, it's something so traumatic and they lose their faith, and it breaks my heart to see so many individuals be in that place, because you can go through the crisis and you can end up stronger and more clear. You can end up like, this isn't for me. And I want to be able to get to a point where I can share enough to hopefully keep someone um secure enough to move forward in their faith until they feel like, hey, I feel a little bit better, I can stand a little bit more on my own. So I try to share as much as that information as I can share it, because as you can see, even just talking about this little bit, it's like it invokes so much emotion. So I share as much of it as I can, the further I get down the road. So I will say that. We end every episode with the same question. So I want to ask you, let me back up. Let me explain this. So we always end the episode with, if you could share one piece of knowledge, advice, or encouragement you want to pass on to someone you deeply care about, what would it be? So the reason I ask every guest this question is, for one, I work in education, so I always want people to come away with some type of helpful information. And I truly do believe that we can all learn from each other. There's something that you can learn from every single person that you run into. And the second thing is, this podcast is called Hey Hannah. It's all about remembering my daughter Hannah, who passed. And this is information that I would love for her to have, would she be here. Just great advice that she can take on to live her life well. So um, even though she's not here, I still like to have the advice from other individuals, in hopes that those of you who are listening can take it and apply to your life. And hopefully it makes a difference for you. So, Amber, I will ask you, if you could share one piece of knowledge, advice, or encouragement that you want to pass on to someone you care about, what would it be?
Probably to give yourself grace, because life continues. Whether you're going through something really tough or you're going through something that's really exciting and good, life is going to move forward. That was probably the hardest lesson that I had to learn in the loss of my son, but it applies in every possible category
Yeah,
you could think of.
that's so true. That's great advice. Well, Amber, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing about Sweet Caspian. That's such a beautiful name. And I appreciate your openness and your bravery to share your story with us. Because again, the more we hear about individual stories, the more we can bring awareness to infant pregnancy and child loss. And that's what we're hoping to do. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.
And that's it. I'm out of here.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Hey Hannah podcast. We hope that you found inspiration, insight, and encouragement in our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay connected with us, be sure to like, subscribe, and review the Hey Hannah podcast. Your feedback helps us reach more people and spread our message of love and wisdom. You can also follow us on social media at Hey Hannah Podcast. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stay updated on all the latest episodes, behind-the-scenes exclusives, and engaging content. And for those of you who prefer the visual experience, catch the video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Just search Hey Hannah Podcast and hit that subscribe button to never miss an episode. For even more Hey Hannah goodness, visit our website at www.heyhannahpodcast.com. There you'll find updates, bonus content, and join a community that embraces you with open arms. Your continued support truly means the world to us. Together, let's spread love, share wisdom, and honor every precious moment. Because here at Hey Hannah, we believe that life is meant to be lived. Remember, a new episode of the Hey Hannah podcast is released every Wednesday, so mark your calendars and be sure to tune in. Thank you again for being a part of Hannah's life. Until next time, take care.
Fate Entertainment. Fate Entertainment.